Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I love to greet you all. Thank you for invitation. The Palestinian problem, the source and main component of the long and intractable so-called Arab-Israeli conflict, has long been rightfully considered a system-forming element of international relations in the Middle East. For decades, it has had a powerful impact on the formation of alliances and opposing camps. This problem has been the subject of many studies which trace the origin and dynamics of the problem, the role of external forces, and the reasons for the lack of settlement, as well as the features of the current stage of the so-called Arab-Israeli conflict, its international significance and influence, the role of non-state actors and militant groups in it. In the early zeros, the George Bush administration unveiled the concept of Greater Middle East, the goal of which was democratization of the Middle East. Under this pretext, the United States sharply increased its activity and involvement in the region, and the states began implementing their strategy with the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the complete destruction of the state. Over the past 2 decades, the United States has become very involved in the political processes of the region, spending colossal resources on it. The changes in the system of international relations, which were mentioned above, forced Washington to change the strategy in the region, and they began to change in the second half of the 2010s. The main goal of the strategy is to stabilize the situation in the region, which could provide security to US allies, as well as get the opportunity to redirect its resources to more priority areas of their policy. To achieve the goals of its new strategy, states had to strive to reduce tensions in the region. First of all, it was important to reduce tensions between Israel and the Arab world. This process was launched with the advent of Donald Trump to power in Washington. In 2017, his administration began developing a peace initiative called the Deal of the Century. The document itself, entitled Peace for Prosperity, a vision for improving the lives of Palestinians and Israelis, was presented in Washington by President Trump in presence of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. The Palestinian side was not invited to discuss the project, and it didn't accept such a decision and express its categorical disagreement. By the way, it can be recalled that the Palestinian Authority announced about breaking off diplomatic contacts with the US administration when President Trump announced his recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The actions of the American government at that time to create a suitable negotiation base are manifested in some of their features which had an impact on the results of the negotiations. First, the creation of an American team of negotiators who fully agree with the opinion of the president. Second, extensive diplomatic and financial pressure on the self-government bodies of Palestine and on the sovereignty of the Gaza Strip, which entailed closing the Palestine Liberation Movement office in Washington in September 2018, ending American aid to the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees. Trump has cut funding for this UN agency, which runs schools and medical facilities for millions of Palestinian refugees across the region and provides them with their main source of employment. reviewing American aid to the Palestinian Authority in the context of the resolutions passed by the US Congress, which was with presidents also in agreement. Encouraging Arab regimes, especially those in the Gulf Cooperation Council, not to link Arab anti-Israel sanctions to the Palestinian issue. In this regard, Jason Greenblatt, senior advisor of Trump, who dealt with the Israeli-Palestinian problem, not only sought to eliminate the Arab countries' objections to this deal, but also made efforts to secure their support in this regard. Abstracting of the implementation of International Security Council resolutions by using the veto power or a resolution that may be of a protest nature for Israel. This issue has manifested itself in relations to the Security Council resolution on Jerusalem and Gaza Strip. Trump unilaterally called for a change in the definition of a refugee, declining that all but 500,000 of the approximately 5.5 million Palestinian refugees should be stripped of their status. The American and Israel, especially the radical Zionist movements, have had no desire since the beginning of the past decades to grant the Palestinian side privileges and advantages, nor have they wanted to witness the establishment of a Palestinian state. The negotiations they had previously conducted were not fundamentally aimed at resolving difficulties and reaching agreements, but were merely a cover for buying time for changes and adjustments in their favor and to the detriment of the Palestinians. As an example, during this entire period, through the construction of settlements and the expulsion of Palestinians, they managed to occupy part of the new Palestinian territories. After that, America and Israel designed their own program of actions and followed it within the framework of the carrot and stick policy. Kushner, America's special representative in Western Asia and Palestine, met and talked with representatives of the authorities of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt during his numerous visits to Israel and other countries, and through threats and bribery persuaded them to the American plan. The Americas also demanded from the Arab states to invest finance into the Gaza Strip in order to improve the living conditions of the population in Gaza. They believe that this measure will reduce its wish to resist and fight and lead it to accept the deal of the century, the same model that Tony Blair implemented in the Northern Ireland and which had a positive result. Of course, one should not assume that the actions of the Americans limited to what was mentioned above. One must always take into account the political pressure and overt and covert threats they exert on the authorities of the Arab states. Zionist officials has also been active during this time. Their most important steps include parliamentary activity regarding the adoption of the law on a united Jerusalem and the recognition of Jerusalem as a capital of Israel, putting pressure on the Palestinians through irregular bombing of Gaza, as well as killing people during peaceful demonstrations, implementing of a program to increase the construction of settlements through the agreements to build 1,000 residential areas and through the expulsion of Palestinians. A consistent discussion of the construction of a fence on land and sea around the Gaza Strip. The UN Security Council met on December 2018 to consider a draft resolution that considers Americans' decision to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel illegal. This draft resolution was prepared by Turkey and submitted to the Security Council by Egypt. 14 permanent and non-permanent members of the Security Council voted in favor of the resolution, but America vetoed it. After America vetoed it, its draft was put on the vote in the UN General Assembly, and 128 countries voted in favor. Only 9 countries voted against that. The UN Security Council demanded an investigation into the killing of Palestinians in Gaza, but America again resisted. A committee to investigate Israelis' crimes against the people of Gaza has been created several times, but Israel has not recognized it. At the same time, in 2018, with the mediation of the United States, secret negotiations between Arab countries and Israel intensified. The process brought its results in August 13, 2020, when the first time in 3 decades, agreements on peace and normalization of relations between the Arab world and Israel, the Abraham Accords, were signed by Israel and United Arab Emirates. A month later, Bahrain joined the agreements, and in December, Morocco signed a peace agreement with Israel. On January 6, Sudan also joined that. The Sudanese authorities then played a role in this pacification by freezing the assets of companies associated with Hamas. With the mediation of Trump administration, secret negotiations between Saudi Arabia and Israel also began. The subsequent administration of Joseph Biden continued this course. Under it, negotiations between Saudi Arabia and Israel have been made much progress. Stabilizing the region also required normalizing relations between Turkey and Israel, and Turkey and Saudi Arabia, whose relations had deteriorated in the mid of 2010s, as well as normalization within the Gulf Cooperation Council between Qatar and other 5 member states of the organization. The United States' desire to create a unilateral, unbalanced, and effective appeasement of Israel, coupled with an attempt to use this to isolate Iran, led Hamas to decide that the only way to save it was to unleash an armed struggle. However, Hamas' goal is not the destruction of Israel, but rather an attempt to turn the diplomatic and political situation in the region against Israel and the United States. The Abraham Accords aimed at forcing Arab countries to unilaterally recognize the State of Israel without West Jerusalem itself making any concessions of the issue of Palestinian statehood. Typically, the United States incentivized this by making unilateral concessions to this country as part of a deal, such as removing Sudan from the list of state sponsors of terrorism or recognizing Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara. The Abraham Accords were not a serious peace initiative because all they did was bribe countries to effectively side with Israel and abandon Palestine rather than pursue peace in one of the region's most prominent simmering conflicts. Moreover, the true geopolitical intent of the Accords was to help isolate Iran diplomatically by weakening and dividing the anti-Zionist movements. Their larger strategy was to promote American hegemony in the Middle East, given Israel's very close relationships with the United States. Confronting the United States in the region has always gone hand in hand with confronting Israel. Whether through Arab nationalism, Syria, Iraq, and historically Egypt, or Islamic fundamentalism, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas. Accordingly to the United States hoped that by diplomatically isolating Iran, imposing tough sanctions on it, and attempting to force it to abandon its nuclear and ballistic missile programs, Washington could maintain order in the Middle East and maintain favorable security relations in the region. To this end, the Abraham Accords promoted appeasement of Israel rather than a mutually acceptable. Necessary for the stabilization of region is the problem of the Iranian nuclear program. In this regard, the United States and its allies sought to conclude a new nuclear deal with Iran. Another issue related to Iran's role in the region is the issue of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The United States is interested in the recently established diplomatic relations between these countries, which could reduce tensions in the Persian Gulf. The US strategy and the processes that took place in the region did not take into account the interests of the Palestinians, without which it is impossible to stabilize the region. The Arab world went to the normalization of relations with Israel without any conditions regarding the Palestinian problem. The creation of the Abraham Accords and the role that the United States plays in them are far from accidental, and they are not connected with the trade activities or ambassadorial exchanges. The main meaning of these agreements is seen in a unified regional response to geopolitical challenges and threats. For example, the United States withdrew from the nuclear deal with Iran, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was declared a terrorist organization. Trump administration made a lot of efforts to exacerbate the regional confrontation. In this regard, after President Biden came to power, the idea of shoring the deal with Iran and Israel, as well as United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia, expressed their concern about the possibility of excluding Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps from the list of terrorist organizations. I see that the time is limited, and I will just say that a new round of escalation in the Middle East slowed down the processes that have been taking place in the past few years. And the difficult negotiations that were conducted between Saudi Arabia and Israel has been suspended. And escalation of the conflict could also further aggravate the already hostile relationships between Iran and its proxies in the region on one hand and Israel on another, up to use the nuclear weapons which Israel officials so often talk about. Can this current conflict lead to World War III? Most likely yes, and in sense of it is already underway. In order for a war to become a world war, a critical mass of accumulated contradictions is a first and foremost necessary, which cannot be resolved by any other non-military means. This condition has been met. The West does not intend to voluntarily give up its hegemony, and the new poles, rising independent civilizations, large spaces do not agree to tolerate this hegemony, especially since the USA and the collective West demonstrate a complete inability to be leaders of humanity, not resolving, but only inflaming new conflicts and wars with their policies. However, if the war cannot be avoided, it remains to